Greetings, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Everything Went Black. Welcome back, Daniel House of Skinyard and CZ Records. Daniel has been on the show once before, and Skinyard's Hallowed Ground was featured in the discussion that way back when I used to host Metal Matters. So hopefully some of you guys are familiar with the band. If not, please seek out their material. It's some of my favorite stuff. I revisit Hallowed Ground every autumn. It has that sort of murky, autumnal atmosphere to it, which I really appreciate. Daniel comes back on the show to discuss Skinyard Selecs, which is an incredible 7-inch collection, beautiful format. And we talk about that. We talk about the band. And of course, there's pseudo-political tangents that happen. So yeah, check it out and enjoy. As you know, Everything Went Black is part of a larger organization known as the Horsemen of the Podcast Apocalypse. Kicking things off every other Monday, we have Brandon Legion's Horror Wolf 666. Up next in the rotation on Tuesday is Into the Necrosphere by Jackie Smith, the finest extreme metal music in the land. Wednesday, of course, is Everything Went Black, but also Wednesday is the deployment of Iblis Manifestation, brought to you by Cheyenne of the great band Trivax. Thursday is another double shot day, as well as being Necro Thursday, where the Necromaniacs Horror Podcast comes at you with myself, Mike Scandato, and Jeff Kashid. We have day one of Soul Knox, brought to you by Carl Hikara, for all things dark, occult, esoteric. Check that out. Rounding things out on Friday, we have Spitball Media, brought to you by Mike Scandato's brother, John Draper. Saturday is a day off. Spend some time with your family and your friends. Go catch a show, catch a movie, that sort of thing. Because on Sunday, Carl returns with day 2 of Soul Knox. Carl and I are deep into our Darkness Weaves collaboration, where we explore the work of Carl Edward Wagner, an author of dark fantasy, weird fiction, horror, sword and sorcery. And right now, we're covering the Kane short stories and novels. We started on the first novel, Bloodstone. So check it out. We switch off every month which podcast hosts the episode. It's either Everything Went Black or Soul Knox. If you enjoy the show, by all means, give us a like, follow us on social media, tell your friends, share, that sort of thing. But if you're so inclined, you can step up and join us on Patreon to support the show. For as little as $1 a month, you get access to bonus content. For $5 a month, you get access to the bonus content plus early access to the regular stream broadcast. For $25 a month, you can be a sponsor. Welcome back, Daniel.
Thank you.
This almost slipped by us, which I think is a shame. You know, I remember we talked about doing this, and the date that we discussed sort of came and went, but I'm glad that we're able to catch up on this discussion.
Yeah, me too. I think it came on for both of us.
Yeah.
I was like, when was that thing supposed to happen? I looked up, I'm like, oh.
Yeah, and it's funny because I'd gone through another sort of the Skinyard comes and goes on my my rotation here. You know, it's in the long-term heavy rotation around here. You know, there's like a lot of new stuff I listen to, a lot of old stuff, and then there's the sort of go-tos that cycle in and out. And I came upon the orbit of Skinyard again recently in the month of October, because Hallowed Ground to me feels like a very autumn sounding record. So it came back into rotation as well as the other records too. You know,
That's interesting. I've never thought of it in those terms, but I like thinking of it in those terms. I like thinking about music and records in terms of things that aren't that are not necessarily defined by how we typically talk about music.
Well, it's interesting for me because I think I discovered Skinyard when I had moved to Bellingham, Washington in the early 90s,
Right.
To pursue this this job I had up there. And I remember Cellophane Square was like a small chain locally, I think, right? There's one in Seattle,
I
And
think there was just two. Maybe there was three. But yeah, I guess that makes it a chain, right?
yeah, so there was one right in the middle of Bellingham, right downtown by the
Right,
bus
right.
station there. And I'd met some people. There was a couple of awesome, small, cool venues. There's a really small scene up there. And, there's like the Up and Up and, the 3B Tavern and all those places. And, I was taken aback by how friendly everyone was because I'd only lived in New York at the time. So I was out there and, people would approach me because I had like a t-shirt on or something. And I'd be like, what are you guys looking for? You know what I mean? But then people were just friendly,
Yeah.
so I met a lot of people. And of course I knew about all the bands like, Melvins and, Tad, stuff like that, Nirvana, of course. And then I got turned on to Skinyard and it was Hallowed Ground. And I bought that record at Cellophane Square, the CD. And I was commuting from Bellingham to Anacortes every morning
Oh
and
yeah.
driving. I would take, there was like the highway route you can take, but then there was also this back roads that I had discovered, which is interesting because back then there was no GPS. So I don't know how I figured out how to get between the two towns. And it was like that early, like 6:30 in the morning, listening to that record. And it was autumn and it really dug its nails into me as being linked to that season. So I think, and Hallowed Ground has that, that atmosphere to it too,
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Yeah.
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 What were you
So
doing in Anacortes? I'm just curious because for a couple of years I actually lived on Guaymas Island, just north of Anacortes, and my first 2 years of high school was actually at Anacortes.
really,
Ninth, 10th grade. Yeah. Yeah.
it was, my background and my professional background is engineering. I'm a mechanical engineer. So,
Oh, okay.
there's a Texaco refinery in Anacortes. And, prior to, I was in Southern California for work for a brief 2 month period down there, and they're like, "Oh, we need you to go to the Texaco refinery," and I'm like, "Okay, cool." So, so I drove all the way up from Visalia, California, which is in the valley, the desert part of California, all the way up to Anacortes, and I stayed at a hotel there. And some of the guys that I worked with were like, they sized me up right away. You know what I mean? It's like there's like these cowboy looking dudes, working there. And there was this one guy who was not like them. He was a different dude. He was kind of like into music and he's like, "Oh yeah, he lived in Seattle actually." And he was like, you should check out the town of Anacortes. You seem, we talked about music and stuff. So that's what I ended up doing while I was still staying at the motel. I would take these excursions on the weekend up there and into Seattle, but and Bellingham, sorry, Bellingham was a way closer commute, easier
Yeah.
commute, cheaper, that sort of thing. And so yeah, that's how I ended up living there in Bellingham and working in Anacortes. And there was that I guess it was a record store. I can't remember the name of it though, but Brett from Beat Happening
Yeah.
worked
Right.
there. Yeah, so I met him and he was cool. And I wouldn't say we're friends, but when I worked at Anacortes on my lunch break, I would go there and buy records. And I picked up like Dope Guns and Fucking in the Streets, like the AMREP compilations and things like that, and
Not the kind of thing you typically expect in Anacortes. Well, I don't know.
no,
When I was there, it was many, many, many years before, but there was always that kind of podunk back in the day anyway, kind of a podunk vibe. So to hear that there was a good source for getting, cool records in the late 80s is great.
yeah, yeah. And this was like maybe 92, I think.
Okay.
So yeah,
Yeah.
so things are quite, the profile of the Northwest was sort of coming up at that point,
Yeah,
and
for sure.
and I'd been aware of those bands since like the late 80s. I mean, Soundgarden and
Hmm.
even on the East Coast, it was like that stuff was,
Sure. Yeah.
if you were in the know, you know what I mean? Stuff was like trickling over there. Yeah, so that was like, but I mean, I love all the records, but it's for me, like Hallowed Ground and just the atmosphere of that record has always been very very intense feeling for like the autumn. And yeah, so that's brought me back to this. And in a long story, sort of circuitous way, we come back to this, the point of our having this discussion today about the 7-inch collection called Select.
Hmm.
So there you go. that's the long journey to this thing, and we picked some dates, but now we're talking now a little bit late in the game, but it's all good.
No, I think the timing's perfect.
Yeah,
I mean, it's where, it still hasn't been released yet, so we're winding down. Supposed to be shipping on December 2nd if all goes as planned. If I have them beforehand, maybe in a few days before that. So we'll see.
yeah.
So let's talk about it.
Yeah, well, just a little preview though, because like I'd actually on the Patreon platform, I shared the video for
Oh,
California,
cool.
and
Awesome.
some people were commenting on it, and I gotten some messages, and some of the younger listeners might not be 100% up to date with some of these bands. So
Right.
I just want to give like a little mini bio of where Skinyard fits into the sort of pantheon of Northwest alternative rock, or whatever you want to call it, punk
Right.
influenced metal, grunge, which I hate the word grunge, but
You know what? It's a good word in that when you use it, people know what you're talking about. It's a point of reference, right?
well, I just want to be clear though that like my impression at least was like none of these guys, none of these people that contributed to this sound were thinking about reinventing the wheel. It was more
No,
of just an extension of like their creativity.
it was purely organic.
Exactly.
And to
Yeah.
be fair, so many of these bands sound nothing like each other.
Yeah. Yeah.
Skinyard sounds nothing like Mudhoney, sounds nothing like Tad, sounds, nothing like Screaming Trees. At least not to my ear.
No, no, you're 100% right. And all those bands seem to be coming from different sort of like, perspectives, but it somehow everything ended up making sense. And
Yeah.
the thing that I enjoyed though about it is like, being a participant in extreme music myself, it's like you end up going on tours where all the bands kind of sound the same. You know what I mean?
Uh,
It's like every band is like a death metal band or a black metal band, or there's like, some variation of that. And that's what the tour package pretty much is from top to bottom. And I always thought I wasn't around to see these shows back then, but the flyers were killer. You look at these lineups and it would just be like you can go and get like a full nights of entertainment of very different sounding bands, you know, and proximity, I guess, is what created the scene. It seems like.
yeah. Yeah, for sure. I mean, it was a creative time for a lot of people in a place where it was gray and rainy a lot of the time. So, of course that's part of the attribution, I think. It's just like, you're kind of stuck inside. And I think this you could say the same thing about the whole like Minneapolis scene, probably for similar reasons, because it's cold and wet and you're wearing flannel to keep warm, not because it's a fashion statement. And so there's all these great bands from that whole scene too.
Oh yeah, definitely.
It's similar.
Yeah, and just like musically, now specific to Skinyard, what was the sort of influence that came into that band? Because I hear a lot of stuff, and I want to see if it
Mhm.
aligns with what you guys were
Well,
thinking.
Skinner is interesting in that we had very different influences, and you can probably hear them. So, the influences that I brought in were different from the influences that Jack was bringing in, which was different from the influences that Ben was bringing in, especially in the early days. Like Ben, I think over time as a vocalist, he kind of found his voice, and I think Hallowed Ground he started to find his voice. And I think
Mhm.
by the time we got to 10-minute warrant, I was going to say 10-minute warning too, 1,000 Smiling Knuckles. By the time we got to that, he really had fully, come into his own in terms of who he was as a frontman, as a performer, as a singer. Um, but at the very beginning, especially in our first record, um, the main criticism we often got was actually because of Ben's singing.
Hmm.
And I think because we were this kind of harder, for lack of a better word, that quote unquote grunge band, we're this heavy band with this kind of crooning baritone voice because what he was really influenced by at that moment in time was very much like Peter Murphy and David Bowie.
Yeah.
You hear that. And it didn't really make sense with the sort of harder, edgy sandpaper aesthetic of a lot of the other singers at that time. Um, over time he became less of a crooner, and I think his singing began to fit what we were doing musically. So that was kind of what Ben brought into the band. Jack came very much from kind of a classic British 70s hard rock, blues rock, kind of like Led Zeppelin, Robin Trower, the Groundhogs, um, kind of more of that vibe. Um, and then he had a little bit of kind of hard metal or like metal heavy kind of prog bands like Budgie, bands
Okay.
like that.
Yeah.
And I kind of had I brought more of the kind of, I hate the word prog, but the prog elements. I was probably the biggest Crimson fan in the room. And but I was also into a lot of stuff that was going on at that time with a more of a punky edge, a la Scratch Acid
Oh yeah.
and The Birthday Party,
Hmm.
um, I don't know, Stranglers, Gun Club. So we kind of brought a lot of disparate elements into what we were doing collectively. Um, but I've always kind of said that the whole thing about what made Seattle interesting as a scene was that, everywhere else you had to choose, are you a Stooges fan or are you an Aerosmith fan? And in Seattle, it's like, well, I'm both. And those elements kind of came together. And so with Skinyard, we had those appreciations, but we brought a lot of additional kinds of influences into what we were interested in doing. There was never any conscious idea of we want to channel these things, though we did do a few covers, and one of the covers we did do one time was a Robin Trower song, but we also did some Bowie covers, and we did a Cream cover,
Just want to add a couple of footnotes here. So anyone out, who was following along with this, lineup. So Ben McMillan went to be on to be in a band called Grunt Truck, which featured members of The Accused
a member,
and a
a
member,
member,
right?
yeah,
Okay. And Ben sadly passed away a number of
yeah,
years ago.
yeah,
Um, and Jack, who Daniel is referring to, is Jack Endino, the famous engineer, producer, and
yeah,
sort of an architect of that whole sonic, profile of that era, and he's gone on to do other things. I believe he worked at High on Fire, and he's a well-known, renowned recording engineer.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he's
It's
probably, he's better known for that than for being the guitarist in Skinyard. Even though as a guitar player, he's remarkable and unlike anybody.
What's also interesting is like you mentioned Stooges and Aerosmith, right? So the band I think that combined those two things perfect, and it's actually how I describe them to people when they're asking about it, is Green River. I was
Yes.
always like, because I try to like push that on people, like, oh, you like, especially like my fiance is a little bit younger than I am, so she's into like Nirvana and punk and metal and stuff too, but like I talked to her about some of these more obscure bands, and she likes Pearl Jam, so I'm like, oh, you like Pearl Jam? You should check out Green River. And she's like, well, what does it sound like? And I say, well, it's like Stooges if Iggy was like the front man of Aerosmith, basically.
Does she know Mudhoney?
Oh yeah, yeah, she knows Mudhoney.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, I mean, that's what's interesting about Green River is they spawned Mudhoney and Pearl Jam, two bands that are great and that sonically I think are incredibly different, right?
absolutely. Yeah, yeah, definitely.
And who are both still very active too. I mean, after decades. So
Yeah,
it's pretty remarkable.
yeah, Mudhoney, you can still catch them live. Like they're still out
They're
there
still
doing it.
great. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. They
yeah. I
played
saw them a bunch of times back then, and I haven't seen them in probably 20 years maybe. But like, yeah, they're a great live band.
They're uh they're not as lively on stage, but they still put on a great show. And the thing is they're tighter than they've ever been. I mean, Mudhoney at first was always kind of this that had that raw, sloppy component. and that's still kind of part of the aesthetic, but as a band live, they are locked in, man. They are, what
Well,
is it?
that comes from rehearsing all these years, I guess, you know.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm guessing they barely have to rehearse anymore because they probably just have such. I don't know what it's like to be in a band, for 20, 30 years, but I imagine that you become such a connected group of people creatively that you really live and breathe like that's the thing about a band over time is you begin to understand each other's individual musical vocabularies.
Yeah.
And so you start to become more intuitive in how you play with each other, even when you're writing new stuff. And I think Mudhoney's probably been that way for a very long time.
So alongside doing Skinyard, you had CZ Records,
Yeah.
and so that we're connecting that to this new release that's still on pre-order at this point.
Yep.
So
Yep.
so uh, have CZ, has that been active at all in the last like bunch of years?
Um, I would say only slightly.
Yeah,
So the last physical release I put out initially was in 2001, which was actually another Skinyard release. It was a limited edition CD called Start at the Top, which was kind of an odds and sods collection of singles and random tracks and compilations and a couple things that had never been released anywhere else. And it was a limited edition. Um, and then 20 years went by and I didn't release anything. So the label was basically just catalog at that point. And then in 2021, I released the 10-minute warning record.
right.
And this was actually one of the two bands I was in prior to Skinyard uh, that basically led to the formation of Skinyard. And this is a recording we actually did in 1984, which is, I guess, an indicator of how fucking old I am now. But yeah, this we almost got signed to Slash at the time, but then the band broke up and nothing really ever happened. But at the time in '84, we were probably one of the two biggest bands in the underground scene, in the Metropolis scene. For those who don't know, Metropolis was a short-lived but very famous club in Seattle at the time. U-Men and 10-minute warning were kind of the two biggest local draws in the underground scene. And I tend to think of 10-minute warning as essentially being kind of the first proto grunge band, even before 10-minute warning, or before Green River, I'm sorry. And in fact, Stone Gossard said it was Paul Soldier, our guitar player's guitar playing, that basically inspired him to really want to make it his life. Uh,
Awesome.
so I've been wanting to put this record out forever and ever and ever, and finally got the sign in like decades later um, from Greg Gilmore, our drummer in that band, who later went on to play in Mother Love Bone, which was kind of a pre-Pearl Jam band. And then Paul Soldier was the guitar player. Prior to me being in the band, Duff McKagan had been in 10-minute warning, and in fact was the last band he was in Seattle before heading down to LA. So anyway, I put that record out in 2021, and it was interesting that this project was kind of indirectly spawned from the 10-minute warning record, because my friend Jeff Kleinsmith, who did the graphic design for the 10-minute warning record, was like, dude, you should put out a singles collection of Skinyard, because he's a huge fan, right? From the early days. And I'm like, that's just ridiculous. And he goes, no, it'd be really cool. And I said, okay, well, if I were to do that, you'd have to be the graphic artist. He goes, well, that's kind of why I'm pitching it to you, because I wanted to. Now, as it turns out, he ended up not being the graphic artist, because he's the Sub Pop design. I think he's head of all graphic design for Sub Pop these days, and he has so much on his plate at any given time of day or week or month. I mean, he's probably the busiest graphic artist in the entire Pacific Northwest. So he just didn't have the time or bandwidth to do it. But the seed got planted, and I got excited. And so, it took a couple of years to really finally get into full speed and doing this. But the package is probably by far and away the most elaborate and also the most beautiful thing that's ever come out on the label. Um, and I think it's been fun from a creative perspective because the idea was kind of twofold. One, that for people who just never knew the band, this is a perfect initiation. This is a perfect way to kind of get into the band, because it covers the entire span of existence from, early 1985 to the band's final show at the end of 1991. And it covers all four of the records. And then there's also one track that was pulled from the Start at the Top collection that also appears on this. And all four drummers that were in the band are on this collection. So, that's what we're talking about. And historically, that's, I think, part of what's interesting about Skinyard too. Most of the drummers in the band ended up going on to bigger things and more well-known bands, much to our chagrin. Our first drummer was Matt Cameron, who is, known as being the drummer for Pearl Jam and has been with them for, I don't know, 25 years. And then was also at the same time for many, many years, the drummer for Soundgarden. He left Skinyard and ended up in Soundgarden. Our next drummer for a very brief moment was Jason Finn. Very different kind of vibe in terms of his style. But he would have been in the band longer, but he ended up going to Europe to pursue his then girlfriend. And when you're in your 20s, that happens, I guess, right? But he later on became better known as the drummer for Love Battery for many, many years. And then I think had his biggest success with Presidents of the United States of America.
Yeah, that was like a legit, like
That
proper
was huge.
mainstream. Yeah, like they were like, definitely a big band.
I'm pretty sure that made him a wealthy man.
Yeah.
And then our third drummer, and a very important one, is Scott McCullum, who also goes by Norman Scott. He was on our second record, the one you mentioned, Hell at Ground, and then the third one, Fist Size Chunks. Other than Skinyard, he's mostly known as also being the drummer for the aforementioned Grunt Truck, which continued with Ben, our singer, after Skinyard broke up. The Grunt Truck actually started while Skinyard was still a band. And then our final drummer was Barrett Martin, and he was probably the most tribal drummer that we had in the band. After Skinyard broke up, he went on to become the drummer for Screaming Trees. But he's also he's very, very busy. He's done tons of records. He's doing production work. He was REM's tour drummer, I think, for two tours.
Oh, wow.
He's done stuff with Peter Buck. He's on Mad Season with Lane Staley. That's
Oh, right. Yeah.
so Barrett's been around, and he continues to be probably one of the busiest drummers in rock these days. So those are all the drummers that that recorded with Skinyard and who are in fact on this box set, Skinyard Select.
So let's talk about the box set, like
Okay.
specifically, because it's interesting because it's a 7-inch collection,
Right.
and yeah, like you said, so what that's I'm a fan of that. I think that's great,
Yeah.
but what was the decision to make it a 7-inch collection as opposed to like vinyl LP 12 inches, because which would seem to
Um,
be more of like a commercial, maybe more, I don't know how to put it, but like maybe a more commercially viable format,
I'm not sure. I'm not sure if it is. I
I mean,
mean,
I'm just thinking from a production standpoint where it's like manufacturing
yeah,
each piece versus like a less units associated
this
with it.
this is hands down the single most expensive project I've ever done.
Yeah.
So I think for a lot of people, they look at the price tag and they're like, "Oh shit, like that's crazy." And it's like, well, think about it. There's literally seven individual pieces of vinyl, seven individual sleeves, and a really nice heavy stock, right? You have to do the design for all of this. They're all on colored vinyl, and then they all come housed in this really heavy duty slipcase. And just to talk about expense for a minute, this slipcase didn't exist at the pressing plant. So they literally had to create a new package just for this project. So of course, there's costs involved with designing and creating that as well. So fiscally, it's probably a terrible idea. Um, but I wanted to make it something really special and cool and unique. And a 12-inch record is like, okay, here's a record. It's not as exciting. The other thing too is there's 14 songs between the 745s, and it clocks in at almost a full hour,
Yeah.
and you can't actually put it all on a 12-inch. So, if and when I finally sell through these box sets, there's the possibility of doing a 12-inch version in the future. But if we do that, we'll literally have to cut two songs from it because it won't fit.
Or make it a double LP maybe or something like that,
Yeah,
Yeah.
maybe but again, that's expensive.
Yeah.
And
I mean, I love it. I think it's great because I'm from a different era, than a lot of the
yeah,
guys who listen to this show. We got, pretty wide swath of
sure,
ages here, but a lot of like younger listeners, like the 7-inch era might have been a little before their time. But
right,
for me, that was like the coolest thing in the world is to have a 7-inch of your band. Like that was like the first you made a cassette demo and then
right.
let's a 7-inch and then maybe someone puts out like a vinyl 12-inch record
Yeah,
LP.
yeah. I mean,
And
this is definitely for the collector nerds out there.
oh
If
yeah.
you are a true vinyl collector, uh, you want this because it's like I mean, I'm not aware of anybody having ever done anything quite like this before. I'm sure they exist. I'm sure 7-inch boxes exist. I probably have a few actually, but as an official release, as opposed to like, it seems like when you see 7-inch collections, they're always like, 10 years after the fact, down the road, and this is like, no, this is an official one time limited edition, get it while you can kind of thing. And, I've always liked to do things that are maybe not the most immediately expected thing, but it's just, my creative side finds projects like this just more fun. And if it's more fun, and you know, I'm more likely to do it.
So now here comes the commercial drops. So as this episode is coming out on the 27th, okay, of November.
Okay, perfect.
So I believe this will still be in pre-order at that date too, right?
That is correct.
Okay,
Yes.
so let's give us the dope, man. What's the deal? How do you order? How do you get your hands on one of these things?
Okay. Well, the easiest way is just to go to your browser and type in skinyardselect.com. Skinyard Select. And it'll basically go to a page on the Skinyard website where you can pre-order it. That's currently the only place. There will be a few people that will be buying it for distribution. I think Sub Pop's going to buy a bunch for the Sub Pop stores. I'm Light in the Attic will probably buy 40 or 50, but that's not a lot. And then there's a distributor in Europe, Sonic Rendezvous, that's going to be carrying limited quantities for certain countries in Europe. But for the most part, right now, if people want to order it, they need to go to skinyardselect.com and order it there. And I will literally be assembling cardboard boxes in my living room and mailing them out as soon as they show up.
That's awesome. That's like a very reminiscent sort of thing for me, man. Like of just
Old school.
yeah, old school like methodology, which I really appreciate. So what's the actual release date? So pre-orders are up right now.
Yeah.
When's the release and ship date and all that sort of business?
December 2nd.
Right around the corner. Okay.
Yeah, right around the corner. And like I mentioned, if I believe they're actually, so they're being pressed into Europe. I believe they're literally shipping in 2 days from when we're speaking. So this is being recorded on the 16th. I believe they're shipping on the 18th. So there is that chance that I may have them in hand a few days before the 2nd, in which case I'll start shipping, you know, like at the end of the week before, maybe like maybe the day after this podcast goes live.
Awesome. Yeah.
We shall
So yeah,
see.
that's really cool, man. And now let me ask you a question. The
Yeah.
the ordering stuff online, you know,
Yeah,
like it's not as cool as going to a record store, in my opinion. I don't know if everyone shares the same opinion as
I
I do.
agree. I agree.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, what's your thoughts about like the sort of impersonal nature of music in general? And I'm even going to extend this out, like, as most of you guys know, I play in a band. That's probably why you listen to this show.
Right.
And writing music now too. Like we wrote our entire last album, which we're recording right now. Uh Separately. We all live in New Jersey, but we didn't really go down to the practice space to work on this material. We all sort
Really?
of did it separately. Yeah. We got together. I got together with the drummer a few times. I pretty much wrote the stuff that I wrote here in this my little studio
Uh-huh.
with like electronic drums, like a drum program. Sent it to the drummer, and he did his thing, and the bass player did his thing in his office, and I recorded all the vocals for the demo. This is not the final thing
Sure.
here in my house, the studio here. So it just in general, it seems like the internet has changed the way we buy music, the way we create music, and the way it's even, distributed and all that. So, you have any thoughts on that?
I have so many thoughts that could be a whole episode. Um, so I've always felt that the emergence of the World Wide Web in 1991 has changed everything that we know in life completely in a way that we can never go back. And some of it for good, and some of it not so much for good. It kind of leveled the playing field for everybody, kind of giving access to everybody for things like, putting music online and, being discovered in that way and being able to provide access to, say, pre-ordering stuff online, and being able to promote material. But the problem with that at the same exact time is that engaging with everything media related on the web and through a browser is a completely impersonal experience. So, why you like going to a record store? Because there's actual physical product that you can hold and look at, and you can read the liner notes, and you can talk to people in the store, and you can, it's interactive. And, clicking a button online is just, it's like, okay, here's a thing, and then it shows up at your house, and you never actually engage with people, which is kind of why like podcasts are cool, right? Because at least you're engaging with people, even though it's through a browser, but you're still, you know, you're being able to listen to two people engage with each other. And I think, yeah, years and years ago, I went to this panel at South by Southwest, and it was called "Social is Killing Social." And the whole point was that social media is great, but it's completely destroying our ability to just talk to each other as people. you know. Um, so for me, it's always been a love-hate, even though it's, embedded in the very fabric of our daily lives. And for a lot of, younger listeners, they've never really known a world pre-internet, or I should say pre-World Wide Web, since the internet officially has been around since 69, but the World Wide Web is what we use, when you say
Right.
www dot whatever. Um, the Seattle scene as we know it, the grunge scene or whatever you want to call it, would never have happened had the World Wide Web been in existence at the time.
That's a
And
that's a strong statement, man. You care to
it's,
elaborate on that?
I will elaborate that. I've actually
Yeah.
thought, I've actually thought about writing a book about this.
Oh,
So every scene that we've ever known, pretty much every music scene, you look at the Nashville. I mean, you could go back to the 40s and the 50s, but you look at Sun Records, or you look at the New York no wave scene, or the noise rock scene in New York, or you look at the Seattle grunge scene, or you look at DC, you look at Minneapolis, you look at Athens, Georgia, you look at Austin, Texas. All of these places had music scenes that happened very organically, were very kind of local. It you these sounds kind of happened that became identifiable with that particular locale. Record labels emerged out of these scenes. You've got Discord, you've got SST, you've got Homestead, you've got Touch and Go, like all these underground independent labels that basically became projections of their immediate scene. And over time, they spread out, Amphetamine Reptile, but even then there was a particular aesthetic. Each one of these labels had their own aesthetic. Each one of these cities had kind of a shared aesthetic. Um, and that was able to happen because the World Wide Web wasn't around to sort of homogenize everything. So within a scene, things are happening quietly and organically, and you're going to each other's shows and you're, indirectly or directly influencing each other, but within a specific geographical defined area. But once the World Wide Web happens, suddenly these scenes become less local in nature and become more global. Everybody can access it. And so what happens now is you'll have some hot new band from some city and they do their first demo and they put it up on who knows where, Bandcamp or whatever. And anybody in the world can now hear that. Anybody in the world can now be influenced by that. And suddenly that thing that used to be so specifically local and so regionally unique isn't anymore because now somebody in Estonia is going, that's cool. We're going to do something that sounds like that. So things become, I wouldn't say music broadly become homogenized, but I would say that the specific qualities that make a local scene unique are now not really locally unique anymore. I don't believe that there will ever be a regional scene the way we used to know it as us old guys.
Yeah.
Uh, I think Seattle was kind of the last music scene that is going to occur in that organic fashion. And I think that's also part of why Seattle rock continues in the consciousness of so many people into music as being really still a big deal to this day. Because can you tell me a single scene from another city that has emerged the way Seattle has since Seattle? I can't think of one.
No, not really. Not to the heights that the
And
bands in Seattle reach, definitely.
and I believe that is why. I
Yeah.
believe the primary reason is the World Wide Web. I also think the World Wide Web is part of why that scene was able to then explode internationally. But I just don't think there's ever going to be a scene that will emerge from a locale again because the World Wide Web prevents it prevents that organic thing from happening.
Yeah,
I
it's
mean,
also want to add to that too, just even as far as local scenes, it's really hard in a lot of ways for there to be a local scene and to get support from people as a
yeah,
band locally,
yeah,
because just last night I went to a show in Newark. My drummer's other band played, and there was like a pretty much local show of just all local bands. And there was a few people there, but it wasn't like everyone came out to support the bands that they knew locally. There was
uh-huh,
really not the same interest level as, say, like when I was like in my teens and early 20s, where there'd be bands that they just played locally, or maybe they would take a trip to Connecticut or something to play up
right,
there, like, or they
uh-huh,
would go out to play in Jersey because I grew up in New York. And you were like following them, you're buying their demos, and all that, and you knew them because they were real to you in a way that, like Slayer wasn't real to you,
right.
and you could access them in a more immediate fashion, and that's really the biggest drag I think about the internet and just the way, or the World Wide Web, and the way that music
Yeah,
is like ingested by people these days is they don't look down the street from where they are, because there could be an incredible band, and there are. I mean, dude,
of
last
course there
night I
are.
saw an incredible band, and you know they're struggling to get noticed because people would rather just go onto Spotify or Apple Music, excuse me, or YouTube, and like watch or listen to something by themselves, like in
Right.
their tiny room somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah, that whole social component is largely missing now. And again, no shade intended, but like, if you're 34 years old, you have never known the kind of experience we're talking about because you've never known the world without the World Wide Web. So, this is what you know, and this is how people ingest information, music and otherwise. and again, there's good stuff and there's bad stuff, but we did lose some stuff,
Yeah.
you know, and for better or for worse,
Well, the one thing I do like about the World Wide Web is I don't have to go into the office every day, which is nice.
no, it's like one of the most amazing transformative tools that we've ever seen. And with that comes good and bad across the board. Politics, good and bad.
Oh
We
man.
good and bad. Like we just everything. It is what it is, and we're never going back, right? So how do you make the mess? How do you make the best of it? I'm not sure, but um,
Well, the thing about that too is, I mentioned earlier where people are enjoying things by themselves, cut off from everyone, and
mhm,
there really are multiple realities that are. All right, look, like this is going to get a little, sort of esoteric, I guess. It's like reality is the what you perceive in your through your sensory organs. We experience reality. It's like a subjective version of what's actually going on around us. Like I'm talking about a very just basic level, like our
yeah,
eyes, our ears. What's actually going on is probably much different than like what we're perceiving because our bandwidth is limited because we had to survive in this world and be able to data chunk and do all these things as hunters and gatherers. You know what I mean? So we were
right,
limited about what the things that we can perceive. Now, if you extrapolate that into a modern society where we're so myopic in the things that we look at that we choose. It's like, the choose your adventure almost. You can pick what sliver that you want to focus on,
hmm
and you will receive a limitless barrage of information. And you will really be living in a separate reality than your neighbor who looks
yeah,
at the other sliver.
yeah,
And that is like no more apparent than it was in the last United States election, really. Just the complete like hijacking of people's consciousness by I am I, good and bad actors, really. You know what I mean?
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I actually think the hijacking of consciousness is taken on mostly by bad actors.
I'm going to agree with you 100% on that. Um, but I'm just saying in a general sense, like I agree 100% that the bad actors are more of the manipulators and the hijackers of consciousness and the complete like transformation of what people of like modification of what's actually going on by using certain techniques, throwing out certain terms like communism, accusing
Right.
people of being communists without really knowing what the definition of communism is.
And most people who get influenced in that way could not define what those things mean.
And there's just there's a series of essays published by Umberto Eco, and one of the essays has to do with creating the other.
Hmm
And that, obviously, are the famous other creators are the Nazis, and without actually, and Nazi Germany, post World War One, Germany was economically not doing well. They were, pretty much in bad shape after World War One.
Yeah.
So National Socialists come in, they find someone to blame. There was pretty much everything was an economic ruin. Socially, there was a lot of social problems, and that's how they were able to, rally the people behind their cause.
You find somebody to blame for your situation and then you use them as the scapegoat.
Right. So in Echo is Italian, so that doesn't tie in with what he was saying. His othering took place in fascist Italy,
Yeah.
but they're similar time periods, and that sort of thing. Um, the modification of reality in this case really has to do with wholesale fabrication, as opposed to actually finding any real historical events to back up any of these claims
Yeah.
that the right wing is claiming. And that's where the World Wide Web comes in, and this whole consciousness adapt and modification and creating separate realities and the choose your own adventure of the news cycles these days.
That is also the definition, in a sense, of the difference between misinformation versus disinformation.
Yeah, back in the 90s, I like reading about conspiracy theories. It was fun. You'd go, like Feral House had all these books out. You could read Apocalypse Culture, and it was fun. It was fun to
Yeah.
like read about the Monarch, MK Ultra, and all that sort of stuff. But it was fun, and you also knew that it was like completely out there, and there was not true. But it's fun to think about these things, And X-Files was really big in the early 90s,
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
But now it's like fiction has like largely replaced reality with some people. And I talk to people. I live in like a kind of working class town, and like, people that I interact with sometimes are I'm shocked a little bit by how people have bought into this alternate reality and have also been so convinced that they're doing the right thing that
Sure.
they are voting against their best interest. And with the cabinet nominations that we're experiencing right now, we know that is in fact true.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I just wanted to share that. So everyone that listens to this, and also this is on the heels of my my rant on necromaniacs, and I had to edit that rant because it just ran too long, and
Yeah.
I was getting out in the weeds on a lot of stuff. But I did put it up on our Patreon, so if you want to listen to the full rant,
Oh, very cool.
you can check it out.
All right. Well, should we get back to music?
Yeah. Sorry about that.
And no,
Once again,
don't take me on. I actually love conversations like this. I
yeah,
do. And I could do it for hours, but we'd probably lose listeners, right?
yeah,
Like, all
definitely.
right, we're going on 2 hours. That's not what I came here for.
Yeah,
Yeah, but it's what you
yeah.
get.
Mike waxing, about reality and politics. But so the video, which I
Yeah.
shared that link with everyone on Patreon, the video for the song California, that's unreleased track,
Hmm.
right? Um, the thing that it's a different song. It sounds a lot different than a lot of the other Skinyard material.
Yeah.
And was that video done like back then or
No,
now?
no, no, no. So the song California, and part of what makes this particular collection exciting is that this is a song from 1985 that was part of our recording session for our very first record. And for whatever reason, it never made it onto the record. Um, and Jack's mad scientist Jack Endino has just all these audio file libraries of so much different stuff. I can't even imagine what it must look like. I don't know if it's well organized or if it's just total chaos, but probably well organized. He too is an engineer, by the way.
I
Um,
knew that actually.
he's an electrical engineer, I think. That's
Makes sense. Makes total
anyway.
sense to me.
Anyway, so we've been talking for quite a while about this whole collection and really the process of like culling all the different songs from all the different records. Not with the idea of like this is going to be greatest hits, which in and of itself is a joke because we never had hits, right? But like we wanted just like what are the if we were to want to play stuff from our various records for somebody who didn't know the band, what are the records that we, Jack and I, the two primary songwriters in the band, what would we want to play people, and why? And then if how would we want to pull songs together from all these different records and different years with different drummers and to a certain degree different vibes, pull them together in a way that is a collection that feels cohesive and as a band, regardless of the fact that there's different drummers. And like our first record was kind of more of an art rock record than it was sort of a classically grunge rock. You listen to the first record and you listen to Hallowed Ground, and in a way, I think of them as two different bands because from a creative headspace, they kind of are. But anyway, I digress. Jack found this song digging through the archives and was like, dude, I just found this. Let me do a rough mix and send it to you. And I'm like, holy shit, this is amazing. And it's that first year and our first record is when Matt Cameron was in the band. And this was a song that, Jack and I wrote. And I don't know why I didn't make the first record because I think it's quite amazing. Hearing it, I'm like, why did this not go on the record? Well, I would have pulled that song off and put this in its place, but whatever. Um, so it's the first song on the whole collection, the first side of the first single, with Matt Cameron on drums, and it's kind of punkier than a lot of our stuff back then. Maybe it's sort of a slight foreshadowing of Hallowed Ground. I don't know. But one of the things we've been doing, or I've been doing with this collection, is I wanted to create new videos for songs on the collection that have never been done before. So that was the first one we did, was for California. There's actually been 4 videos created so far. I can send you the link to one for the alternate version of Living Pool, which
Yeah,
was a
yeah.
song from our. I thought I did, but maybe I didn't.
No, no, you did send that
Okay,
to me.
and I
Yeah.
love that video. As a video, I love it even more. But it's really, really cool having a video for this long lost song that nobody's ever. I mean, I didn't even remember it when Jack sent it to me. I had no recollection. Um, but yeah, my friend Victor, who he's the bass player in camper band Beethoven and
Oh,
was
okay.
Monks of Doom, and he's now in a band called Eyelids, and he's done stuff with Cracker as well, and he has a bunch of solo records. He's a very old dear friend who's also been doing a lot of video stuff. So he offered to do a video, it's using mostly found material for the song, and I think he kind of captured a certain vibe. Um, Jack didn't really understand all of it, but Jack's from Washington and I'm from California originally, and that's where I live now. So it kind of resonated with me in terms of sort of the whole anti-war protest
Yeah.
element that's kind of woven in, because I'm like, I was a kid growing up in Berkeley, California, protesting the Vietnam War with my mom. So to me, I'm like, yeah, that makes perfect sense. Because when I think of like my state, I think of there being a very strong kind of uh, protest culture, at least how I grew up.
Oh yeah. Are you from the Bay Area? Is that where,
Originally,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. And you live, did you move back there, or you moved out to Southern California, or?
I'm in Southern California now. I
Yeah.
was in LA when I left Seattle in 2001. I moved to LA, and now I live in San Diego.
Oh, yeah. I like the Bay Area. That's
Yeah, I do
like
too.
one of my favorite areas of the country to visit. Definitely.
Still have many dear friends there.
Yeah, the song itself, it's like when you first sent it over, I was like, oh, cool, like an unreleased track. And then
Uh,
it was like very and I shared it with some of my friends, and the friends of mine that knew the band were like, wow, this is like really different, really interesting. And I was like, that's when I kind of touched on that whole thing of like, yeah, there's almost like a Captain Beefheart, like if I mean I might be way off on that, but there's like a Minutemen like Beefheart thing going on, like definitely like a punk thing, but a punk thing in a way that was like
well, there's
front
kind
and
of two
center.
two parts to the song in a sense, right?
Yeah, yeah,
There's the kind
exactly.
of faster punky thing, and then there's that moody swampy thing. I think what you're picking up on as Captain Beefheart, probably for us at the time, was more of a homage to U-Men.
Oh yeah, okay, yeah. I could, now that you mentioned, I could see that.
Because when I listen, I'm like, oh, I kind of remember doing a song back in the day where we were like, let's make this kind of a U-Men-y kind of vibe. And I think this was that song.
Yeah, and just like a really interesting mixture, and like now that I know that it came out like sort of predates a lot of the other material, I was like, what an interesting like point in the history in the career of the band, to
Yeah, I
look
mean,
in
this
on.
is our first year. I mean, our first rehearsal. Me and Jack. I think our first, just the two of us getting together was January of 1985, and I think we started rehearsing regularly with Matt the next month in February. And by then, Jack and I had probably written half a dozen songs, and And then our first show was actually opening for the U-Men in
Oh,
June of 1985.
that's kind of like a lost band too. I mean, I know that, if you're into it, you know about them, you know what I mean? But you're like they're not a household name, I should say, you know.
No, they should be. For true Seattle rock aficionados, you should probably seek out the Sub Pop did this amazing collection of basically everything Human ever recorded.
Yeah.
And there's a bunch of stuff that had never been released or heard prior to that collection. And, Jack and Dino, of course, our guitar player, remixed the entire thing from all the original tapes, and it sounds amazing. And Sub Pop put it together. The package is just beautiful. Like everything about it is, if you want Human, it's all there.
I picked that up when it came out a few
Yeah,
years ago.
it's
It's
really
great.
great. But
Yeah.
yeah, and even to this day, they're still largely, you know, unknown in the greater zeitgeist of that whole history, that whole Seattle rock history. In part because I mean they broke up. They were around and originally in like 1981, I think. They were one of the first two bands I ever saw when I moved to Seattle in 81. And actually, I think I misspoke. I said I moved from Seattle in 2001. I moved in 2003, but that's whatever. That's an aside.
Yeah.
I moved to Seattle in 81, and I think the first two bands I saw were U-Men and a band called the Blackouts. And both of them completely blew the top off of my young skull and kind of changed my perspective on music from that point forward. Probably both of them were very influential in how I proceeded in my own musical career.
I'd say the Blackouts were on one of those amphetamine reptile collections, like one of
I,
Dope
no,
Guns things.
I don't no, I don't think they were. I don't think they were. They recorded, I think their entire output is something like 14 songs total. Uh, they did a couple of singles, a couple of EPs on these obscure little labels out of Seattle. And then they left Seattle kind of early on in the early 80s. Um, and they ended up at one point in Chicago, and they put out this EP that was kind of more of a dub kind of EP on Wax Trax Records. Um, and then after the band broke up, actually two of the members became part of the Ministry's band, Al Jorgensen's
Okay.
band. So Bill Rieflin being one of them, the drummer, who is now sadly departed.
Yeah.
But he was in Ministry, and then later he was in this version of King Crimson that had three drummers. Um, an amazing guy, and frankly an amazing drummer as well.
I didn't know that. I didn't know that you played in King Crimson. That's pretty. I knew about the Ministry connection, but yeah,
Yeah.
that's yeah.
Yeah, there was a
Wow.
version of Crimson before he died that had three different drummers at once. I saw it live a couple of times and it was pretty mind-blowing. Super cool.
Well, Daniel, thanks for joining us again. So you want to throw out that where to get
Yes.
select one more
Yeah.
time?
So I'll just give a little pitch, right?
Yeah, little pitch. Yeah, there you go.
Let me do my little thing. So Skinyard Select is, as we talked about, it's a limited edition collection. It's 14 songs from Skinyard. Me and Jack and Dino, the two co-founders of the band, we basically curated all the songs. We pulled songs from all four of our studio albums from the years 85 to 91. The collection includes all four of our drummers, Matt Cameron, who's in Soundgarden and Pearl Jam, Jason Finn, President of the United States, uh, Norman Scott or Scott McCullum, however you think of him, from Grunt Truck, and then Barrett Martin, who played with Screaming Trees, Mad Season, and also Walking Papers with Duff McKagan. So they're all on here. And if you want to get your copy, you can get it. Just go to skinyardselect.com and get them while they're hot. That's it.
One last ironic question is
Yes.
will will this be available on any of the streaming platforms?
No time soon, but probably eventually.
Okay.
I
Yeah.
want to I want to sell through these first because I'm afraid if I'm still sitting on inventory, if I make it available to streaming, nobody will buy
No,
it.
that makes complete sense to me too, actually.
So
But I
yeah,
just figured I'd ask, in light of the conversation we had.
And by the way, none of these songs have ever been released on the 7-inch format before, and there's a couple new remixes, a couple alternate versions. So it's a pretty cool little package.
I look forward to getting my copy, man. I'm excited about this. And yeah, so I'm eagerly awaiting that.
Awesome.
And once again, Daniel, thanks for joining us. And we'll talk to you
Thank
soon,
you.
man.
Yeah,
You
I
got
really
it.
appreciate the opportunity. It's a great conversation.
Hell yeah.